Just after sunrise on an otherwise ordinary July morning, something seismic shook the halls of South Korea's government. A short but powerful statement from the White House made its way across the Pacific, a universal 40% tariff on all imports into the United States. No exceptions, no friends, no mercy. For Washington, this was about economic strength, but for Seoul, it felt like a declaration of war. South Korea, a nation that thrives on exports, especially to the United States, suddenly saw its economic lifeline placed under siege. Within hours, the calm of Seoul's financial districts gave way to whispers of emergency meetings and retaliation strategies. At the Ministry of Finance, officials didn't mince words. They warned of bold and swift measures if market volatility got out of hand. They didn't reveal the contents of their plan, but the message was clear. South Korea was not going to sit quietly while its trade routes were threatened. This was more than a trade dispute. It was the opening shot in a full-scale economic standoff, one that could affect everything from chips and cars to energy and digital platforms. To understand why Seoul reacted so quickly, you need to look under the hood of its economy. South Korea is an export powerhouse. In fact, it holds the world's fifth largest trade surplus. And when it comes to the United States, the numbers are massive. By the end of 2024, South Korea was shipping around $115 billion worth of goods annually to the United States. That's not just a number. It's the beating heart of Korea's industrial machine. Once the agricultural warning shot is fired, Seoul moves to heavier firepower aviation and energy, two of America's crown jewels. Let's start with aviation. After the pandemic, South Korea's Korean Air and Hanjin Cal Group placed orders worth a staggering $17 billion with Boeing. These weren't just business deals. They were backed by government-guaranteed financing. That means Seoul has both the power and the paperwork to delay, renegotiate, or even cancel these orders. And it has options. Europe's Airbus A350 is ready to fill the gap. If Seoul publicly hints at switching to Airbus, it would echo what the European Union did during its own trade dispute, using aircraft purchases as leverage. That single move could cost Boeing billions and generate backlash from Washington state to Capitol Hill. Now, for energy. Since 2023, the U.S. has been aggressively exporting liquefied natural gas to South Korea. In fact, it sells $14 billion a year, competing directly with Qatar and Australia. If Seoul decides to cut contracts with U.S. LNG terminals and sign a 5-year supply deal with Doha, it could cause capacity underuse at U.S. liquefaction plants, especially in Texas and Louisiana. That's not just bad for business. It's bad for jobs, and worse for local politics. The energy lobby in southern states is a major donor and influencer during presidential campaigns. By going after Boeing and LNG, Seoul hits two pillars of the American economy and places thousands of U.S. jobs and billions in export revenue under threat. And well, the message becomes louder. This trade war is real, and Seoul is done playing defense. By now, the pressure is building. But Seoul isn't finished. The next shot is aimed straight at Silicon Valley. Every year, U.S. tech giants like Google, Netflix, and Apple Music earn around $3.7 billion from South Korean users. That's revenue from streaming subscriptions, app stores, and software licenses. But Seoul holds a quiet but powerful weapon regulation. If the trade war escalates, South Korea's Ministry of Information and Communication could reactivate long-shelved draft laws. These include rules that would force foreign digital companies to store data on Korean soil, form local partnerships, and pay new compliance fees. It may sound technical, but the impact would be huge. If Netflix has to build local servers, if Apple must share revenues with Korean partners, or if Google faces tighter control over ad sales, their profit margins drop fast. These companies thrive on scalability. Local rules make things expensive, slow, and difficult to operate. And here's the smart part. This move doesn't just hit big tech's balance sheets. It stirs up political trouble. Senators from California and Washington state, home to these digital giants, would face enormous pressure to step in. This isn't just economic retaliation. It's strategic. It turns billion-dollar U.S. companies into lobbyists for Seoul, fighting Trump's tariff wall from the inside. And just when it seems like Seoul's playbook can't get more daring, there's one final high-stakes card left to play. This is the move Seoul doesn't want to make, but will if pushed. The electric vehicle supply chain. Right now, South Korean giants like Hyundai and LG Energy Solution are pouring billions into new EV battery plants in Georgia and Tennessee. These projects are designed to meet U.S. requirements for EV tax credits under domestic production rules. In total, they're expected to create around 15,000 American jobs. But here's the catch. If Trump's 40% tariff hits battery modules shipped from Korea, Seoul could pull the plug. It wouldn't happen overnight, but it doesn't have to. Seoul could start redirecting production to friendlier regions. Indonesia, with its vast nickel reserves. India, where joint battery ventures are already in motion. Or even Spain and Poland, where EU-based assembly lines are being quietly prepared. This move would hit the U.S. where it hurts, in its green jobs agenda. The same factories Washington promotes as a future of clean tech growth would start vanishing. And the voters promised those jobs? Left in the cold. But it's risky, because retaliation at this level doesn't just shake trade, it touches geopolitics. South Korea still depends on the U.S. for defense, especially with North Korea's nuclear threat looming just across the border. And any bold economic move has to be carefully balanced with China, which could retaliate with its own pressure. Perhaps by banning Korean cars, or suspending K-pop and cultural imports. That's why Seoul's strategy has a limit. It's not trying to start a fire on two fronts. It's trying to light just enough of one to force Washington to come to the table. But the question remains, will it work? South Korea's goal isn't to win a war, it's to avoid one, by making it too costly for the U.S. to continue. Seoul isn't trying to collapse the American economy or start a Cold War with its biggest military ally. Instead, it's performing what experts call a sword dance. Each move precise, each target calculated. The aim? Push Trump's 40% tariff wall back to reality, ideally somewhere closer to 15%. High enough to satisfy protectionists, but low enough for Korean industries to survive. Here's how that strategy adds up. In year one, South Korea could lose $18 billion in exports directly, but through price renegotiations, especially in semiconductors, that number could shrink to $10 billion. Automotive and EV sectors would still take a $4 to $5 billion profit hit, even with local U.S. production. Add in petrochemicals, appliances, and consumer electronics, and the total impact could be a $25 billion drop in Korean exports. Without a smart response, 130,000 Korean jobs could vanish, fast. That's why Seoul's retaliation plan moves in phases, like gears in a machine. First, agriculture tariffs to rattle the Midwest. Next, LNG and Boeing delays to pressure energy and aviation lobbies. Then, digital regulation to panic Silicon Valley. And finally, EV and tech escalation to threaten America's future growth sectors. Each step cost more than the last, for both sides. If Seoul fully activates this sequence, it could generate $37 billion in pain for U.S. exporters. That's not a headline. That's a warning shot across the negotiating table. Because ultimately, South Korea knows it cannot afford to destroy its partnership with the U.S. The North Korean threat, the fragile balance with China, and the health of its own economy demand careful navigation, but it also refuses to be cornered. So while Washington blasts away with high-caliber tariffs, Seoul answers with sniper fire, targeted, efficient, and impossible to ignore. And now, all eyes are on how high Trump's wall will actually go, and how far Seoul is willing to push back. What do you think? Is South Korea playing this smart? Or is this a risky gamble with too much at stake? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the global economic chessboard.